Okay. Let's look at Habakkuk. We know very little about him, other than that he ministered at the latter days of Judah. So he'd be contemporary with Jeremiah.
Right before Babylon.
Yeah, right before Babylonian captivity. So he's a contemporary of Jeremiah, Daniel, Ezekiel, all these guys. Yeah. His audience, of course, is going to then be Judah facing exile. The background is, at the time that Habakkuk writes, Judah is now in a state of decline and collapse. It looks, from the dating of this, that Jerusalem is on the verge of falling, so we're somewhere near 605 BC. It's the first fall, not the final fall. Okay, and so we're talking 606, 607. We're probably talking, Josiah's death. So likely Josiah has been recently killed. The Judean ruling class is wicked. Josiah was the last good guy. His son, carried to Egypt by Pharaoh Necho, is going to die there. Jehoiakim is only going to last long enough for the Babylonians to get there and haul him off. And in the midst of this, the injustice and the wickedness that would have been held at bay by Josiah is now just broken loose. Because what you have now is you have got a sudden vacuum of leadership. And these people who, under a righteous king, has had to lay low, there's no restraint. And so, following Josiah's death, just wickedness was everywhere. I mean, that's the thing. Again, following Josiah's death, Jerusalem God describes as being filled with the blood of victims. And so you have a complete corrupt system that immediately becomes apparent with the loss of a righteous king. Now, under arrangement, the literary arrangement of this, the style from which the author is operating, this is unusual. This prophetic book is done differently from many of the others, where you got just basically a pronouncement of doom and blessing and criticisms. Here, this book is designed as a dialogue between Habakkuk and God. So a different feel, a different style to it. Habakkuk's going to voice his complaints twice. And God is going to respond to him each time. So Habakkuk asks a question, God gives an answer. Habakkuk asks a question, God gives an answer. So you've got this interchange back and forth between the two of them. And then, of course, the final verses of chapter 2 reflect the promise that arrogant Babylon will one day be judged by God. They're not going to survive. And, of course, the last chapter again, what? Calls for faith. Calls for faith. Now, there's not a lot of development of the idea of restoration here, but then, again, the focus is really on Babylon. In some ways, this is Babylon's version of Nahum and Obadiah. Obadiah is for Edom, Nahum is for Nineveh. Habakkuk, in a sense, is really for Babylon, to spell Babylon's doom, but it's just not addressed to Babylon, and it's more gentle, more reflective than the other one. Now, the issue here in Habakkuk is that while Babylon is destroying Judah, her wickedness seems to be going unpunished. And he's wondering, is this just? Is this fair? It just doesn't look right. It's just like, if God was to use Al-Qaeda to destroy America, we'd think, why? They're far more wicked than we are. Look at what they're doing to people, sawing their heads off, torturing them, murder, killing innocents. That's the same question he's asking. Yeah, we need to be judged, but why them? Isn't there something better? Now, the theme, I believe the dominant theme of Habakkuk is why you need to trust God. The reason to trust God. Because God is talking to a righteous man whose faith needs to be strengthened here at the very end. Because he's about to go through 3 defeats of his country and watch him be hauled off into captivity. He's about to watch his nation be dismantled. And there's nothing he can do to stop it. But he's a righteous man. He's not a part of the problem. He's been trying to be a part of the solution. See, that's the thing. And so we have a need, because when your nation's being judged, you're being judged. And so do you feel like, well, God, have you really deserted us maybe? There are those questions. So the message of the book is that the reason for faith in the living God is because he's using Babylon to judge Judah's wickedness and promises to judge Babylon in return. So, first 2 chapters, the broad outline, I divided into 2 parts. Chapters 1 and 2 is national sin and Babylon's wickedness. You've got national sin, the sin of the nation, that Habakkuk's going to bring up, but also the problem of Babylon's wickedness. Then chapter 3, after God has answered his questions, is Habakkuk's prayer of trust in God. Once God answers his question, he says, okay, now I can understand. And I can trust you. And it doesn't make life any easier. I mean, he's still going to have to be scrambling for food and safety and all those kinds of things, but he knows what's going on. And he can have calm assurance that God is in control. God knows what he's doing, and I can trust him. And that's what we need. I think that would be very helpful for us in this very difficult world we live in.
What did you say the theme was again?
The theme is the reason for faith in God. Why he needs to keep trusting God. The reason for faith in God. So again, chapters 1 and 2, he begins the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. An interesting term there. It's a term used. It's not the same as a woe, but it's the message that has been laid on the heart of the prophet, the burden that's been put on him. The oracle that has been passed to him to decree. And he begins by asking, how long, O Lord, how long shall I cry and you will not hear? Even cry out to you violence and you will not save. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. For strife and contention arises, therefore the law is powerless and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, therefore perverse judgment proceeds. So, he brings up the problem. He says, Lord, I'm looking all around, and there's all kinds of injustice and wickedness, and how long are you going to do this? And I'm praying for these people. I'm praying for this righteous person over here, and he still gets cleaned out in court, in a rigged court case, and he loses all his property. And I'm praying for this friend over here, and he was arrested and killed. And he's innocent, and I know it. And I keep praying, and it's like you're not answering my prayers. I think that's the nature of what it's saying. I see all this injustice around me, and yet, where are you? Now, you wonder, why isn't God offended? And here's an important pattern that I've seen with God in a principle, is that when we have these hard questions, God wants us to ask them. But there's a right way to ask and a wrong way. Israel complained. They grumbled. It wasn't an act of faith. But throughout Scripture, when people ask the hard questions, even like Habakkuk is doing here, but they're asking because they trust God, then God respects that. He honors that. And so his question is coming out of a realization. He knows God's character. He knows God is a righteous God, and he's a just God. So he's asking the hard question, since you are the righteous, just God, why are you allowing this to continue? People ask that question all the time. Why does God allow evil in the world? If God is a good God, why does he allow evil? Yeah. Theonomy. Yeah. Theonomy. Or theodicy. Theodicy. And notice God's reply in verse 5. Look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astonished. For I will work a work in your days which you would not believe though it were told you. For indeed, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation, which marches through the breadth of the earth to possess dwelling places that are not theirs. And he goes on to describe them in gory details. And so he basically says, don't worry about it. I haven't missed it. I've noticed the wickedness, and I'm going to raise up the Babylonians. Now remember, at this point in time, Assyria still is a buffer, at least. Now, depending on when you date this, if it's early enough, Assyria still is a power, and Babylon is just beginning to knock them off. If he does this around 615, see, Babylon is still just starting to take them out. It's 606 when they finally finish it off. Between 615 and 606 is really the time of Babylon suddenly sweeping through and wiping them out. It's about a 4-year time period where they really gain their independence and defeat Assyria, and then it's the mop-up operations that follows that. But, God says, Habakkuk, I'm going to take care of the wickedness in Judah, called the Babylonians. And, of course, this tells us that, again, even before we pray about things, God is aware. Now, we should still pray. And that even now, in the world that we're in, the wicked movements within our nation and the wicked nations around us, their judgment is coming. We may not see it on the horizon yet, but their judgment is coming. When Germany first started invading, could anybody imagine how they were going to end up? I mean, they thought everyone was going to end up speaking German. Who gave England a chance of making it? It's at the initial stages, it looked impossible, and yet Germany's doom was just on the horizon. It was just 3 or 4 years away. You think that they are the world power, and in just a very short time, they're going to be completely devastated, building Volkswagen Beetles. And big change. But God responds to them. Notice God doesn't tell them, quit whining. He says, no, that's a legitimate prayer, and I'll answer your question. I'm raising up the Babylonians, and they are going to be devastating. And so he responds then, after he has gotten an answer from God. He says, are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. You have appointed them for judgment, O Rock. You have marked them for correction. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously, and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? Why do you make men like fish in the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with a hook. They catch them in their net. They gather them in their dragnet. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they sacrifice to their net and burn incense to their dragnet, because by them their share is sumptuous and their food is plentiful. Shall they therefore empty their net and continue to slay nations without pity? Now notice what he next says. This is how he's still speaking. I will stand my watch and set myself on the rampart and watch to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer when I'm corrected. Now,
just fold the arms.
Yeah. No, how I understand this is he's asked this hard question. He's asked the question, God, you said you're bringing the Babylonians, but they're more wicked than Judah. Why are you going to use them? And then he says, and I'm going to wait for you to give me an answer. That's what he's really saying. He says, I'm standing my watch. The enemy's coming. I recognize that. But I'm really waiting for you to give me an answer. So I believe this statement is actually a statement of trust. In other words, he's saying, Lord, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to stand here, watch, and wait. Now, solve this for me. Does it make sense? Because what he's really saying is, I know your character, and it seems out of character for you to use someone so wicked to judge someone who's less wicked. See, I think that's what he's really struggling with. He's not struggling with the fact that Judah is going to be judged. They need to be judged. That's fine. But it's who he's using. And it's really saying, Lord, why him? Why the most wicked guy in school come be the bully? Well, why not the nice jock come straighten this out? Or, someone who's nice. Why that?
Yeah, but he's saying here, it sounds like he's forming his answer, or thinking about, I'm going to form an answer after I'm corrected for what I just said.
That's right, yeah.
I'm going to come back again with another, it sounds like Job or...
yeah, he's ready to dialogue with God, yeah. Well, God, you've given me one answer. I know you're going to give me another, and I got another question in line here. Yeah. So, what's neat about Habakkuk is this dialogue back and forth shows you the relationship that he has with God and the trust that he has in God, but also the confidence he has that God will be patient with him and let him answer his question. But for Habakkuk, that's the thing. He wants an answer to the questions. Again, he's not rebelling against God. He's not complaining against God. He's asking God to help him understand. And I think that's the big difference. That's the big difference. And so God does respond. Of course, this is one of the key passages in the Bible. He answers and he said to me, write the vision and make it plain on tablets, that he may run who reads it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. But at the end it will speak and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. Behold the proud, his soul is not upright in him. But the just shall live by his faith. Now again, here's a promise to the righteous Jude. And he says, and I think proud here, behold the proud, is a reference to those people practicing injustice in the nation of Judah at that time. I think that's the sense behind it. Yeah. So in contrast to the people who are facing judgment, the righteous, the just, shall live by faith. And of course, this is quoted many times in the New Testament. And so then he begins to declare the coming judgment on them. And notice the series of woes, woe, woe, woe. So he pronounces woes on the wicked. And as we go through here, he says, he looks at the pride, and he says, will not all these take up a proverb against him and a taunting riddle? And he asks a series of questions, but then he goes to say, woe to him who covets evil gain for his house. And we see the injustice. And he says, woe to him who builds a town with bloodshed, who establishes a city by iniquity. And again, this is a clear reference to the killing of the innocents. And so he goes on to say, notice in verse 13, behold, is it not of the Lord of hosts that the peoples labor to feed the fire and the nations weary themselves in vain? Whereas, I am still sovereignly in control, even of what you're doing. And notice the promise here, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. Again, a very famous statement. And God says, I'm going to be glorified in this judgment. Is what he's really saying there. And then again, woe to him who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. You're filled with shame instead of glory. You also drink. In other words, you're going to get paid back what you did. And so he, again, you've got people. You've got the injustice in the court system. You've got murder and people taking property. You've got them drugging each other. getting them drunk in order to take advantage of them. And then you've got idolatry. What profit is the image that its maker should carve it? The molded image, a teacher of lies, and the maker of its mold should trust in it to make mute idols. Woe to him who says to wood, awake, to silent stone, arise. So you've got social injustice, you've got a corrupt judicial system, you've got corrupt government, and you've got corrupt religion. You've got idolatry. So the indictments are in every area, and that God is going to judge them. And so Babylon is doomed. Babylon is doomed. Because just as Judah was corrupt, you can see Babylon is corrupt in every area. In every aspect of life. Because this is a description of the Babylonians and their injustice. They are just as they have injustice in every area that Judah does, but they're worse. They're worse. And so this brings God's final judgment. Now, the thing is historically, what happens? Well, after Habakkuk's prophecy is when Babylon actually rises to its zenith. Nebuchadnezzar builds the city of Babylon and the Hanging Gardens, and it makes the crown of the earth, and it actually rises to the zenith of its glory before God finally brings his judgment on them. And that begins with Nebuchadnezzar's death and the poor leadership that follows and the eventual conquest by the Medes and the Persians. But even then, God's judgment is a slow, agonizing kind of judgment on Babylon. In that sense, Babylon disappeared, but the city of Babylon could persist for, until New Testament times as a village. But the nation of Babylon really doesn't last very long. I mean, they lasted about 70 years. And then they're gone. Nebuchadnezzar, and then he's followed by a series of kings who die or assassinated and wiped out. So Babylon's existence as a nation was very short-lived. And their destruction came very quickly after Nebuchadnezzar's death. And so, how's Habakkuk going to handle this? Well, this ends with his prayer of trust. God finishes speaking in verse 20, where he says, the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silence before him. And then this chapter 3 is actually, if you want to think of it as a separate thing. Notice how it begins, a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet on Shigionoth. And this is a psalm. It's got an introduction like the Psalms have. And so he begins, O Lord, I have heard your speech and was afraid. O Lord, receive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran. Selah. Whatever Selah means. And some think it means a musical interlude or something like that. Because again, this is written as a song to be sung. His glory covered the heavens, and the earth was full of his praise. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hand, and there his power was hidden. Before him went pestilence, and fever followed at his feet. So he's describing God in his glory and his power. He stood and measured the earth. He looked and startled the nations. And the everlasting mountains were scattered. The perpetual hills bowed. So he's describing God's glory in this first part, and then he says, O Lord, were you displeased with the rivers? Was your anger against the rivers? Was your wrath against the sea? That you rode on your horses, your chariots of salvation? So again, he addresses God in this, in prayer and in his greatness. And then you have another musical interlude or whatever, Selah. And he goes on to describe, you divided the earth with rivers, and he talks about, again, his creative power. and his majesty and his control and his sovereignty. In verse 12, you marched through the land in indignation, you trampled the nations in anger, you went forth for your salvation of your people. So again, he's describing God in his sovereign control of nations and history and his power. And so he comes to this, and he talks about how you thrust through his own arrows. He defeated the enemies. Then in verse 16, when I heard, my body trembled, my lips quivered at the voice, rottenness entered my bones, and I trembled in myself that I might rest in the day of trouble when he comes up to the people. He will invade them with his troops. And so his emotional response. But then notice how he ends. Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet, and he will make me walk on my high heels. And then, like the other song, to the chief musician, my string instrument. But this song to be sung. But he ends with trust. He's asked God for mercy. He's described God's glory. But he ends by saying, I can wait on the Lord. And though the fig may not blossom, fruit not be on my, in other words, no matter what the consequences of God's judgment is, though my world is about to be shattered, and in his judging, there's going to be extreme poverty, and we're going to lose so much. No matter how bad things get physically, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, enjoy in the God of my salvation. He's saying, I have committed myself to trusting you. See, God answered this question. He asked the hard questions. How can you sit by and let wickedness grow in my country? And in this your country. You're the God of this nation. How can you let this happen? And God says, I'm not bringing the Babylonians. And he asked the second hard question. How can you use someone more wicked than us? Look at how wicked they are. Goes to the list. God says, they're not. We'll wipe them out too. He says, okay. Well, I know we're facing judgment, but I can trust you. And he hands himself over to the Lord in faith. And that's the really neat thing. Again, that's where you see that what we're dealing with here, even in his questions come out of faith. They come out of a knowledge of the character of God. And when God answers him, he can accept his answer because of the character of God. He can trust God. It's a reminder to us. It's okay to ask the hard questions. There are times when we're going to go through bad times. And there are times when you may ask, why, Lord? But we should ask out of faith. Now, he may not answer us. It may be like Job, where all it does is says, quit whining. But he may also answer. Because there's been things, I know in my own experience, there's been things that happen in my life, and I've wondered why. And God doesn't answer me immediately. But 5-10 years later, I look back on it and I go, oh, yes, it makes sense now. I see now what God was doing. And so it is okay to ask the why questions, but we ask them for the right reason. And I think for us, we see the pattern again. God did not allow Judah to spiral down into a state of moral decay. And he won't allow the United States to get away with it either. I think we're too accountable. There are too many Christians, and we've had too much exposure as a nation to God's rule and God's word. We've never been a Christian nation, but because of biblical influence, God will hold us as a nation accountable. And I think we could see ourselves, our nation, face the judgment of God. But as we do, we must keep trusting Him. Because in that, in the midst of that, He's accomplishing something. And He will be using us as His instruments to do it. But He won't make it easy. I mean, for example, if we got our eschatology wrong, and the Antichrist does take over, and everyone has to get the mark of the beast, and we say no, there will be consequences. You know, if you're like my little brother, no problem. He's probably got a cave somewhere up in the hills with lots of guns and supplies. He's ready. And there are people like that who are already ready to run to the hills. But, you know, we could face all kinds of hardships. But as Habakkuk trusted God, we are too. Because the righteous man shall live by his faith.
But this, I mean, this is really mind-blowing. I mean, it's just astounding to me. The more every time I read this, it's like it's fresh, because God says, on the one hand, I'm asking you to live by faith, but on the other hand, you can't do this.
Yeah.
Because in your flesh, you're a coward, basically.
Yeah.
You're going to run, or you're going to be militant. You're going to pick up a sword, a gun, whatever. You're going to defend yourself. You're going to be a human. But Habakkuk here is saying, no, this is an uncommon faith he's talking about. This isn't, because I remember I've been in the church all my life, but it was always a philosophical